as you know, the mission of Wake Divinity is all about being agents of justice, reconciliation, and compassion. Pro Humanitate is in our DNA. It's just who we are. It's why we are here, why we have been called and beckoned to do the work that we are doing. And I'm just so grateful and delighted to be in conversation with these three leaders from not just our Wake Div community, but from our surrounding community as well.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you. I'm very pleased to welcome our three guests. To my left, Daisy Lamb, who is the North Carolina State Organizer for Bread for the World. And in the center, we have Tahina Rash, who's the mission developer for the North Carolina Synod of Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the LCA. That's right, not all the Lutherans all at once. And a trainer for the Organizing for Mission Network. And finally, next to Brittany, we have Brandon Rensher, who's the Senior Political Strategist and Community Organizer and trainer with Organizing for Mission Network and Tectonic Justice. Sorry, my words will come out. So I'd love for all of you, just to, by way of introduction, a little more introduction, tell us about your work and kind of how you got into it. And we're going to have 4 or 5 questions. We'll kind of go through the panel, and then we'll have opportunity for students to ask questions. And none of these questions are, they're all very ambiguous, so you have nothing to be concerned about. Jason, I think I'm going to go first. Sure.
As John said, my name is Jason Blanton. I am the state organizer here in North Carolina with Bread for the World. North Carolina is one of only 3 states that gets a dedicated organizer. We are a strategic state for a number of reasons. How I got into this work, I was a pastor in the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship world. I moved my family to Charlotte in 2010 to begin to replant a church there. My career in ministry was always in what I call replanting, going to churches that had a past and needed a future. It was spring of 2012. I was the varsity women's coach at a Christian school in Charlotte with a team that I had built from scratch the year before. My church was in the middle of a capital campaign and just found out that we were pregnant with our second child. And my phone rings, and it's something called Bread for the World. And they say, hey, we've identified you and about 30 other folks from across the country. We want to bring you to DC. We want to teach you about something called advocacy. Growing up white Baptist in the South, I had zero framework for what advocacy was and why I should be doing it. I honestly didn't have the bandwidth for it, said so, and they were persistent. And so by that June, I was in a kind of a crash course training in advocacy, which culminated in our annual advocacy summit. I remember saying a prayer in the east wing of the White House, and as I said that prayer, it washed over me that there are people in this room who can do a lot about the things I care about. And I was got from that moment on. I pastored for several more years, and I did briefly some development work at a seminary, and when this job with North Carolina and Bread for the World came open, I threw myself across the doorway and said, you'll never get rid of me.
Thank you. I feel like a lot of my life just happened by accident, and how I ended up in the places and spaces and thinking about how the Holy Spirit has the best sense of humor in the world. I grew up as a Hindu, and my parents immigrated to the United States in 1970. I was not born in 1970, but I was born much later, and I learned about not everybody has the same rights as everybody else who lives in this country. My mom was not a citizen of the United States while I was growing up, and when I was old enough to vote, my mom said, "You are registering to vote, and you are going to vote because I cannot." And that really struck me, of like, but my mom teaches kindergartners the Pledge of Allegiance. She sings the star, she teaches them the Star Spangled Banner, like sings it with them and says the pledge every morning. And it didn't really hit me until I was like, wait a minute. My mom doesn't really get to have a say in how her life is led in this country. She has been in the United States since 1970. And so for me, that was the impetus of getting involved in community and voting and advocacy. But then organizing came. I went to seminary in California, and my first call was in Oakland, California. And that's actually where I learned a lot about faith-based community organizing. I learned a lot about the free breakfast and lunch program from the Black Panthers, and realized that and I'm thinking about Reverend Jason Sermon this morning, you have to start with the children, because if you invest in the children, you have a future. And so it was this realization of, we need to invest in one another, and we need to do that so that we can all live in the fullest image of who God has created us to be. My introduction to faith-based community organizing came in 2018. I was between pastors, and it was a training that changed my life, and it actually really changed how I read the gospel and who Jesus is, and that Jesus is our beacon for resurrection and liberation. And how can we keep that? Like, we can't keep that to ourselves. This is something that has got to be spread and shared. How do we do this to ensure that everybody has power and advocacy and is able to use their own voice? And that's actually where I got really invested in the theological groundings of community organizing, and really investing and studying the saints. Because we all didn't get here on our own. We got here from the community of saints, and we're going to be ancestors for folks who come after. And so that's a lot of where my investment is looking at this theologically through the lens of the community of saints and body of Christ.
What's up, y'all? My mother is how I got connected with community organizing. She wouldn't call herself that. But growing up in a small town in Southern Pines, North Carolina, anybody familiar with Southern Pines, small town life? The Black church and Black neighborhoods were the places where you gain access to resources, and you figured out how to move and live in the world. And my mom was a sassy, she still is sassy, a sassy Black woman that wore makeup, pants to church, the Baptist and United Church of God church that we went to. She broke all the rules, but they couldn't do anything with her because she was effective. She knew how to build trust with people in the community and bring people together, mainly around children and young people. And she just took me everywhere and got me involved in NAACP, et cetera, as a kid. And so I knew when I went to college at UNC Chapel Hill, which I just want to shout out the Tar Heels while we're in this place. I knew I wanted to be a leader. And the only real option that I had, sort of the imagination I had at the time, was to be pastor, or to be a business owner, like to be a businessman. I failed econ too many times, so I couldn't do business. Couldn't do business anymore, and I decided to major in religious studies, and felt like the path for me to have a real impact in my community was going to be through ministry. But I didn't really want to preach. I didn't really want to deal with church people. I really wanted to be like a prophetic voice and more leader in my community. And that just was the only pathway that I saw to do that. And so, in many ways, organizing has come to me through survival. And it's only been maybe in the last decade that I've gotten the kind of formal training in organizing that many of my peers and colleagues across the country, got when they were much younger, because they were in cities or they were in states where there were strong organizing networks like IAF, like Gamaliel, like PICO or Faith in Action. They're called Faith in Action now. I had a black church in my mama, and so we had to figure it out. The time that I really started to name myself as an organizer was when I got my first appointment in United Methodist Church, and as an elder. And it was in Todd, North Carolina, a little rural, small community outside of Boone. They had gotten a grant from the Duke Endowment to start a mission community out of the parsonage. The church was dying. I was there to replant it. And a white rural community with a bunch of libertarians, conservatives, and hippies. Me with, this big black guy with a, little son, and at the time, my partner. And so we moved there, and it was the summer after George Zimmerman was acquitted for murdering Trayvon Martin. And I had a choice to make. Would I move my family to be closer to the movement for Black Lives where it was active across the state, or would I develop the leadership and imagination of these white folks to be able to see the way that they might be in solidarity with Black folks around the issue of valley? What that meant for me was that I had to figure out what those folks were. And one of the first campaigns that I worked on, through the local river that people across the aisle, across all kinds of differences, they cared about. And I'll never forget it. I had to climb down this ladder, my big self, and he staged an action inside of this river with folks, different backgrounds, and it was just me and my son and a bunch of white folks from different backgrounds. And we were able to delay that pipeline from being put into and that really was just kind of beginning to make sense. Take on different roles in organizing organizations like the Criminal Federation, and currently working with Local Organization Network, which is a national organization that trains pastors and in faith-based community organizing to really empower the kind of communities they want to see in their local communities. And we're hoping to actually bring that training actually to our lives. So I hope we'll be able to share more about it later.
Great.
Friends, so if you had to put words to what community organizing is, how would you frame it? More specifically, why is community organizing particularly in this landscape that we're seeing now?
You can go in any order.
Any order,
I'll go ahead.
Okay.
Raise your hand if the world feels overwhelming. Yeah. Yeah, actually both of them. And thinking about one of the things that, because I've repeatedly felt overwhelmed, thinking about being a parish pastor and thinking about what does it mean to be that pastoral and prophetic voice in the world, but also what does it mean to be from the body of Christ? So for me, community organizing is gathering Christ's body to live out the gospel. Like that is community organizing to me. It is that you get to go to the body of Christ, and there's a big overwhelm of the world, and so this is where I learned to cut an issue. You figure out what are the resources that you have, what does your community need, and how do you build power and to collectively move towards liberation and justice. But yeah, it's the body of Christ and incarnating the gospel. That is community organizing. I also think this is a pastoral answer.
I want to commend to you before I answer an article by Dr. Luke Bretherton. He wrote an article last fall in September. I guess that's still summer, and I don't know what counts as seasons anymore. He wrote an article called How to Live Well with Enemies. And I am a lifelong Tar Heel fan, even though I'm a Jordan Webb graduate. So for me to speak nicely about a professor that served for many years at Duke University is a little hard for me, but Dr. Bretherton is tremendous. He speaks the language of organizing. And in that article, I'm just going to quote him a little bit. He says this, and this is pretty consistent with a lot of community organizing and the teaching that we go through. Politics is the best way to enter into community with people from other communities, with other priorities and beliefs. When we encounter others, we have four choices. We can kill them, we can run from them, we can try to force or coerce them into our own beliefs, or we can enter into politics. And community organizing is the gateway to that kind of positive, productive politics. It is a way to encounter the world by holding on to core belief systems and dialogue with others who may have other core belief systems. And we speak the same language up here. You've heard the word power several times. I don't know about you. You all are in seminary. Well, it's a very different time. I was at my old seminary last Tuesday at this time, exactly 20 years from the day when I was finishing my capstone class. And I remember talking about power last week and how we don't talk about power in seminary. We don't talk about power in church. Yeah. And we need to learn about power because the people that oppose us understand it and they use it.
That is right. Say that again.
Can I do a little back and forth? Is that okay? Yeah. All right. I'm organizing. I'm trying. How would any of you define power? Since we're on that, how would you define power? Anybody? Just share a lot. Go ahead. The ability to define yourself for you. The ability to define yourself for yourself. Anybody have anything to add on that? Leverage. Leverage. Is power good or bad? It's both. Say more. It depends on who's exercise. That's right. With determining its nature. That's right. That's right.
Man, you guys are way ahead of the game.
That's great. I didn't learn this until either. Community organizing is about power. It's about helping people to see their own power, how they can link that power with others, and actually use that power to leverage the kind of resources they have to get what they want in their communities. You're exactly right. Power is neutral. And anything that is happening in our communities is happening because we did something for that to happen. And so either implicitly or explicitly, if we choose to remove our consent to those decision makers that have the power to make decisions about our lives and our communities, they can no longer function and do what they have to do. And so community organizing is about developing leaders to see their power, to connect with others, and to make powerful decisions together so that if a decision maker tells us no, we can enact a consequence. How many of you have ever been in a situation where you had something happen to you and the only thing that you could do was be angry about it? Right? Organizing is about turning that anger into strategy so that you can actually bring people together to say to decision makers, no more. Right? That's what organizing is.
So we kind of got into this a little bit already, but I'm curious, we're in a divinity school setting. Students in divinity school may not think of community organizing, naturally as a vocational pathway. What are kind of concretely, what practices do community organizers engage in? What, kind of leadership exercise? And why would theological education be for those of us who may not understand that?
I'll start with a caveat, which is there are a number of ways. There's no one way. The Poor People's Campaign is different from the community organizing. Brendan mentioned the Industrial Areas Foundation, the IAF. That's my training. My boss's boss started out in the IAF, and I spent last summer in Queens, New York, training with the IAF. And the tool that we learn and use the most, which is as old-fashioned and as old-timey as it gets, is the one-on-one relational meeting. And if you can learn to do that well, it will expand your ministry, your community. You will have a stronger church. I contend you'll probably have a stronger family. The one-on-one relational meeting, which is to learn how to have a conversation that gets to the heart of what makes someone tick. And again, we're speaking the same language. One of the questions that we get to ask, and really to agitate, I met John Lewis several years ago, and he talked at that meeting about good trouble, which is something he talked about frequently. We get to make good trouble as organizers. And one of the questions we get to ask people is, what pisses you off? And then we get to follow it up with, this is to what Brandon said, then what are you going to do about it? That's right.
So from the one-to-one meetings, because you figure out what people care about, what they're passionate about, what pisses them off, and it's almost like the accompaniment into how to act. And from the one-to-ones, I love the one-to-ones, but also moving from the one-to-ones, I love the house meetings. I love meeting with communities because not everybody needs to agree for decisions to be made. But we also have to figure out how are those decisions being made that impact us and our communities. And getting house meetings together is figuring, I don't know about y'all, but I love Post-its. I love Post-its. And so one of the things that I love is the first question I ask people is why are you here? What got you into this room? And I give them all the Post-its that they want, and I tell them one reason for Post-it. Somebody could have invited you. You got to come to a warm place from a wintry locale. That was a reason. And I have everybody capture their reasons on the wall, and then we look at it throughout our house meetings, that we take a breath, we take a pause, and then we look at all of the reasons. And we remember not just our why, but we remember the collective whys of what got people in the room to be willing to meet together in that same place and space. And so for me, it moves from the one-to-ones to the house meetings.
I think another key skill or practice is cutting edge shooting. I think we talked about a little while ago. In seminary, we do learn a whole lot about big ideas, big abstract problems, right? Systemic injustice, racism, all these things, right? We even, learn big ideas about solutions, right? The beloved community, right? Our theology. But what seminary doesn't teach us is how to actually take the beloved community and make it concrete, right? So cutting an issue, think about why. One of the first campaigns that I worked on in Greensboro was around trash, problem with trash on the south side of Greensboro, a neighborhood called Oaxaca, where I live. And the city, there's just a trash area. You go to most urban areas, especially there's going to be a lot of trash, right? And we had been doing a listening campaign for about a year, having house meetings, bringing folks together. And it was time to cut an issue. And there were two big issues. And the way that we talk about it in the community organizing world is you want to choose an issue that's widely felt. And the two issues that folks care about were and trash. If you're on the right side of town, other side of town, there's lots of speed bumps, lots of slow down signs, kids playing signs, but you don't have that in the south side, on the south side. And then in terms of trash, you know, folks on the other side of town put out couches and mattresses that they no longer needed, but it gets picked up within a week. But on the south side, we found that there were bulk trash piles that had been sun for longer than a year. So cutting an issue, you know, the way this works, people always say, I want the to be cleaner. And cutting an issue would be, that's the pie. What's slice of that pie that you make concrete to get the And so what we decided was that we had to educate ourselves who's responsible for it. They're not responsible for litter, right? They're really responsible for picking up litter. The city is responsible for picking up trash and receptacles, glass, but they're also responsible for bulk trash. And so what we decided was that we wanted the city to pick up all the bulk trash piles that have been sitting forever in our neighborhood. That's what the issue is. Now just imagine when you went to the city and said, we want our neighborhood to be clean because we believe in the community. They would look at us and be like, okay, we believe in the community too. So we have all of us, more, but at that time we had a full majority Democratic city council. You know, they want the same kind of thing that we want, but in terms of organizing power, you have to teach people how to actually cut an issue so that they take a big problem and make a concrete solution and a demand to the people who give what they want.
So we frame today's conversation as community organizing as a spiritual practice. How is community organizing a spiritual practice?
I'm not real spiritual,
So Reverend Brandon and I are part of the organizing and our grounding principle is that, I thought the title for today's conversation, that's actually our grounding principle, is that community organizing is a spiritual practice. And I have been trained by folks who've been trained by IAF, who've been trained by Pico Youth in Action, who've been trained by Gamaliel, who have these particular training sets through which they train their trainers. And I was part of an experiment with Organizing for Christian Network that they had created their curriculum. And their curriculum was called Sacred Spiral. And the lovely thing about spirals is when you look at it on a piece of paper, like there's a center point, and it's outward and outward and outward. But if you look at spirals, like 3D, 4D, you see that there's depth. You see that there's distance, you see that there's closeness. And so realizing that the way that I learned community organizing is that you go through the sacred spiral of organizing. But within the sacred spiral of organizing, there's also other spirals. There's times for sacred pause, where you're trying to figure out what does it mean to cut an issue. And so taking that sacred pause and taking that time to individually and community discern through one-on-ones, through house meetings, through community gatherings, what is the thing that we care about deeply, how we can move and collectively use our power to influence and hold people accountable. Then we go into what we call sacred listening, and that's where we do intensive one-to-one, where we do intensive house meetings, where we engage in active and sacred listening. And we move to sacred action, where we figure out like where are the areas where we can act. And then we also remember to celebrate, because I think so often in community organizing that when there is a win, it's almost kind of like the culture of white supremacist activity of like, you just need to move to the next thing to be productive. It's like, no. the part of the sacred spiral and the sacred cause is that you take time to celebrate your wins, because that actually energizes you, that energizes the community, and that brings new lifeblood into, okay, we have celebrated a win, and now if we've actually had a win in organizing, what's going to be our next move? But taking that time to celebrate, I think, is really important. And so for me, that celebration for me comes at the Eucharist, comes at communion, because that is where Christ meets us to feed us and to send us out to the world. And so I take that as a form of sacred celebration in order to go out in the world to be an organizer, because I have been fed. Now it's time to feed others. So that continuation of feeding can continue. Because we're called, at least in my tradition, we're called to feed and bathe people. Like, that is the most basic needs for the internet. And so what does it mean to empower other people to feed and bathe themselves so that they can feed and bathe others? And so that is also part of the sacred spiral, is that it continues to ripple outward. That's the other thing about the spiral, is that it also looks like water, the waters of baptism, rippling out.
So
A lot of spiral fan.
I confess,
We would like to know more about that sacred spiral.
I confess this is, in preparing for today, this is a new set of thoughts I've had. And so you guys are kind of my crash test dummy with these thoughts. I want to kind of zoom out a little bit. She just said is spot on and really well said. I want to talk about organizing from a Christian citizenship standpoint. And our motivation in organizing will in some ways depend on how you view your institutions. And I'm gonna lump two categories. These are not my own, these are present all throughout Scripture. But you either view your institution as blessed by, chosen by, walking with God. And so then your motivation organizing is to be, and here I'm stealing from N.T. Wright among others, is to be part of the coming of the kingdom, right? As we pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So in that model, then you are a part of kingdom bringing as you organize. Or perhaps in the sort of Old Testament prophetic model, maybe your institutions want to be following God, but they need a little course correction. And so organizing can be a means as Christian citizens to create some course correction, to just develop power to create action that corrects course. So that's one motivation. The other is if you see your institutions as empire, right?
Oh.
And so in that case, then you are in some ways like Jeremiah. And you're trying to see to the blessing of the city in which you dwell, but you're also a set apart, sanctified people. And you're motivated by blessing as many folks with a good life, the kind of life that their Creator intends for them. It's possible, even as you work against the current of empire. And Paul is the greatest example of that as the first Christian community organizer within the Roman Empire, setting up distinctive communities to try to create blessed communities following God. Now, those are the two, and obviously there's nuance in this, and most people will see their institutions in either of those lights, maybe all at once on any given day. And then the outcome of all of that, the point of all of it, is really, and here's preacher language for you, but it really is about loving your neighbor. It's about neighboring in the way that Jesus tells it in the Good Samaritan, where he takes a neighbor from something you are by geography and turns the neighbor into something you do by loving action. And so community organizing is neighboring. The or I guess it's neighboring, right?
I think I want to go up personal with this. There is I was trying to look at the quote, but my phone is acting up. James Baldwin, I think it was in The Fire Next Time. He talks about, it might not be that. Anyway, James Baldwin was a pastor. I don't know how many people know that. He was a pastor. I think it was in the Church of God in Christ, if I'm not mistaken. And he got fed up. And there's a quote where he says, I'm paraphrasing, he says, I got to a point where I couldn't really withstand, people praying at the altar or preaching. I just wanted with all my might to tell them to get off their knees and go organize a wrench strike. And that's been my experience as a Christian person, is that the church breaks my heart all the time.
Say that again.
And so has the movement. But what community organizing does for me, the process of bringing people together to build unity, deep unity, and solidarity with each other, where there once wasn't solidarity or unity, to have them share the experience of deliberating together, right? Principal struggle is the language that we often use to actually wrestle it out, to come to a conclusion together, to be in discernment together about what they want to see change in the world. But not to stop there, to actually then go do the thing and to see the thing come to pass. For me, seeing that happen over and over and over again in my life, in the communities that I've been an organizer in, it really gives me hope, to be honest. It is the site, it's the best expression experience in church that I've witnessed, to be honest with you. And it's something that I constantly crave more and more of. Much more than I crave being in a worship service or, being, in other kinds. Not that I'm not knocking those things at all. I'm just trying to, speak to my reality, heartbreak around how the church so often has such a beautiful vision, but rarely enacts it. Community organizing is a vehicle, a tool, a strategy. Taking those words and that vision, that imagination, and actually enacting it. Incarnating it in the world.
Yeah, incarnating it.
I think Brandon must have been in my middle question. Because we want to flow the conversation from here, we open it up to students to ask questions. With this question, what does hope look like for you at the intersection of faith and hope? I'm thinking organizing. Mm-hmm. What does hope look like? What gives you hope?
Well, Luther has an answer. And so, keeping in mind that Martin Luther had his issues too, I think that within Lutheranism, that Luther himself actually became a golden calf, have an idol of all sorts, because it's like, if you look at his later writings, it's hella problematic. But there's something that Martin Luther said that sticks with me when I think about hope. Somebody, and I don't know where exactly this is found in Luther's canon, so Dr. Shaner, you may be able to help me out. Okay. All right. So, upon being asked the question, what would you do if the world were to end tomorrow? Martin Luther said that.
Table talks.
Yeah, house meetings. Yeah, Martin Luther, house meetings. There you go. That he said that he planted a tree. And I think one of the things that actually really gives me hope is a lot of. So one of the things that I do for Organizing Mission Network is that our trainings are also deeply grounded in theology. That we need to find our spiritual why to do what we do. And so I have been a trainer, but my primary responsibility with the Organizing Mission Network is as a theologian in residence. And the thing that always keeps me coming back is I am not here on my own merit. I am here because people used their collective power in years and generations past. So so that I can sit before you today in a color, in clerics. And because of the generations past and the ancestors who were able to bring me to this point, I have a theological duty and responsibility for the community of saints to come after. And so that's actually what gives me hope, is that I sit here because I have been the hard work of generations. So many of them have been unnamed and have been unwritten or written out of history. Keep that in mind, that's happening right now. And so I don't know if I'll be able to be written in history, but I know that I am part of the Word made flesh. And so that is what gives me deep and abiding hope, is that being part of this cosmic Word made flesh is that I know the work does not end with me, and it will continue until Christ comes again.